Hello, I'm James Fitzsimons and welcome to the Career Scoop, a podcast all about career progression, advice and experiences aimed at assisting those who are in career transition. Today my guest is John Bateson. John is the Managing Director and Senior Portfolio Manager at IIU. I'm delighted to welcome you to the show, John.
Good morning, James.
Welcome to the Career Scoop with Elevate Career Advice. I know John a long time, so maybe, John, you'd give us a quick overview of your career to date, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, well, I went to school in Belfast and did A-levels, chemistry, physics and maths, which of course is a perfect combination of subjects for somebody making a life in business, but there you go. And I guess even at school I had this graw for wanting to be my own boss at some point in life. Now, the irony is that as I map out my career, I've never been my own boss and I will never be my own boss, but nonetheless that was the objective as an 18-year-old. So I had two choices. I was going to either stay in Belfast and do pharmacy, or I really wanted to come to Dublin, and down there I wanted to do business studies in Trinity. So I chose the latter, did what was ESS back in the day, now BESS of course. I graduated from there and then went into KPMG via the milk round and studied accountancy for 4 years, qualified. And as soon as I qualified, I left because I never really had a sense that I was going to be a career accountant. Dermot Desmond came calling in 1989. He was setting up a new corporate finance team in what was NCB, and he asked me to join that, which I did. I guess I thought at the time, I had a few more years in KPMG in me. I had a lot more to learn, but this opportunity was just too good to turn down, and I reckoned that even a year or two in NCB, even if it didn't work out, it was probably going to be better for my career than staying 2 more years in KPMG. So that's what I did. And I've worked with the man now for over 30 years since. That was the start of a very long journey. I was there for 6.5 years, and then Dermot sold NCB to Ulster Bank, and he set up his own family office stroke private equity operation called IIU, and he asked myself and 3 others to help him set that up back in September 1995, which we did, and I'm still there. So that's the path. Not a lot of change, I have to say, but it's been some journey.
Highs and lows. What have you learned? Going back to KPMG or Trinity KPMG, IIU, NCB IIU.
Well, I mean, Trinity. I know sometimes you can look back. You can look back on certain parts of your life, particularly the further away it is now, and you look at it perhaps with some rose-tinted vision. But I mean, my 4 years in Trinity, it wasn't all high, but it was tremendous. It was a wonderful experience. Maybe coming from out of town, had to meet friends. I mean, I have lifelong friends, probably from my first term in Trinity. So that's a definite high. KPMG, I guess the high there was the fun you have an audit. You'd understand that yourself because you did it for a period. The crack you had, out on a job in the middle of middle of an industrial estate in Taller, walking time, just great stuff.
Any funny stories from your audit days? Humorous?
Nothing springs to mind, to be honest with you. Do you remember something that we worked on together?
No, I was just wondering. If I recollect, you were more senior to me, so you got the mileage in the way out.
Yeah. That's funny. I mean, there was a lot of laughs, James, but I can't think of anything particular. Have to pass on that one.
Okay, no problem.
Come back to me.
Well, some of the characters we met, I suppose, and clients, and I suppose to me, what I learned from my time in auditing, you had to learn to communicate with what was in front of you because you needed information from the various companies you visited, and they didn't really want you there. So you had to develop your skill set to actually find that person who was a gatekeeper, who would say, "Can we have these books, please? Can we look at this? Can you answer this question?" And I always remember the funny stories of trying to, if you could crack that in one of the other clients, well then the audit would go smoothly. If you couldn't, well then you were chasing information the whole time.
That's true, and I suppose that it does come down to personality, doesn't it, and demeanour, and how you treat people. You tend to get the best out of people if you treat them well. So if you're necessarily evil by being in the building at all, you got to get on with them, right? So it's a fair point. I wish I could remember some, because we had some great characters at that time.
Yeah,
Barry Mahan.
it'll probably pop as we go through this. Something will pop into your head.
And then we've gone to NCB like, because of the highs and lows. NCB, I suppose, the standout thing there was, it was 36 hours a day, 200 miles an hour. It was looking back on it, it was actually fairly mad. But that was the time. It was late 80s into the early 90s. It was all about deals. There was a lot of stuff going on, and frankly, looking back, it was the real making of me at one level. But it was you really were doing too much, and it was actually to the point of almost being unsafe in the sense that you'd be working on a particular transaction in Dublin for the day, then I'd hop in the car to drive to Cork to brief a board on something the next morning, and it was and then back that evening. It was mad, but boy was it great fun, and I guess that was all that experience was all about the deals. It was all about getting the stuff done because we were an advisor, right? So as an advisor, your budget every year is zero, and you got to get out there and shake trees and convince people that this is the right thing to do. And sometimes they came into you, but because the NCB was a new kid in the block, we didn't have that stable of quoted PLCs that Davies had or Goodboys had. So we had to graft for everything, and we did a lot of private company work, co-op work. And actually, probably the high point of that time was there were 4 West Cork co-ops that supplied milk to a cheese making plant in West Cork called Carberry. And it was owned by what at the time was a behemoth of an organisation called Grand Metropolitan PLC. It's now Diageo. And they wanted rid of it. So there were a lot of people sniffing around because it was a fantastic plant. But these 4 West Cork co-ops decided they'd like to have a crack at it. So they employed us. And it was extraordinary, because the 4 of them would compete with each other on the ground. But here they were trying to put some sort of loose confederation together to deal with this unbelievably professional organisation who could buy and sell them, and we won it. They got it because there was a very senior guy in Grant met. There was something about these guys that he got. These local farmers, because that's the way it worked. In those days, the co-ops. It was a local guy supplying the milk who were also on the board and ran the thing. Jenny was just one executive, maybe 2, and he just got it. And I remember one seminal day where we were stuck in all these various points in the legal agreement. We were getting nowhere, and this fella came over from London to try and sort it out. And he came into the room, and he'd obviously been well briefed. And let's say there were 12 points outstanding. He said, "Right, you can have 1 to 6. You definitely can't have 10 to 12, and let's talk about the other 3." And in the space of 2 hours, we had it done. And I guess that showed to me that, and it's something I would have applied subsequently in a general sense. Pragmatism is important. In business, you can't be hanging out for the nth degree of everything that you want. And actually, Dermot would be of that mindset too. It's leave some for the next guy. If you feel the deal is worth doing, a transaction is worth progressing with, whether whether you're investing or you're divesting, don't be trying to eke the last cent out of something. At the end of the day, particularly when you're investing, it's a partnership. You gotta get on with the people you're investing in. So don't screw them. Don't try and do a fair deal for everybody, and then work together as you go forward. And that's something which, as a tenet of how to do business, I would have learned back on that deal, which would have been probably 1992, 93.
Wow. So, but I presume that once you're doing a deal, or you're now you're probably investing in companies, taking over companies, inverted commas. But back then you were advising.
Yes.
But you still had to deal with them after the deal. So everybody had to get on, I presume. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise it becomes, like, if a company gets taken over, the magic happens with the sum of the parts, hopefully, post-acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times people don't put enough time into getting people to know each other.
Yeah, if there's no chemistry, it isn't going to work. But funny, the big difference between what I do now and what I did then was, you're right, as an advisor, and that was one of the downsides, you might say. As an advisor, you help a company or a group of co-ops, whatever it is, do a deal. And then that's it. They go off and do it, and you got your fee, and what's next? Whereas in private equity, which is where I am now, you live with it, for good or bad. Now, in fairness to Dermot, he ultimately makes a decision, and he doesn't tend to blame people if something goes wrong. But you blame yourself if something doesn't go right. For as long as you have that investment, as you say, you got to get on with people. And we do have a philosophy of it's all about partnership. We don't invest in something and let them at it and forget about it. We're actively involved, and that means you've got to get on with the people from the get-go.
And your experience, obviously, without getting into particular details, about deals or companies' investments that didn't go right for the post acquisition or post investment human stuff? Do you want to share anything like that? Not particularly.
Well, of course, the worst one would have been when you're lied to. So at the end of the day, and again, Dermot would still shake his hand on a deal, and the number of times that we have not done a deal after he's agreed it, even after due diligence, when you might find stuff that would trouble you, is very low. That's just the way he is. Dictum mea pactum.
Because you bet on the people, or you bet on
and dictum mea pactum is his motto. My word is my bond. So if he looks you in the eye and you tell him what the business is and what you're going to do with it, and he agrees that he'll invest X million for Y%, unless there's some big hole in the due diligence, we'll just crack on with it. So, but there have been a number of times, one an investment the way in, and one when we were already in, where people lied, and there's not a lot you can do about that. And I mean, I know you are aware of a legal case, and I suppose I would also put this down as a high, because even though it was horrendous for many years, the simple fact was that we invested a lot of money in a UK company on the pretext of certain numbers which were just bogus, and within 3 months of making the investment, this started to come to light. I must say, wasn't as convinced initially that the guys were the bad guys as Dermot was. He just had a sniff that something was just not right. So that basically was a 6-year campaign. And kind of right long story short, ended up in the High Court in London. But we won, and even though I'd said to Dermot on umpteen occasions, this will be a Pyrrhic victory, because these guys have no dough. If we win, you're not necessarily going to get your money back. He said, that's not the point. The principle here is, I don't want those guys doing this to the next fellow, which is fantastic. As it happens, because we won the case, we were able to effectively take over the company with a 30% shareholding. We now own it all, and it's going very nicely. Thank you very much. It's it's a lovely story in the sense it's never going to be a global leader in anything, but it's a steady little business run by honest people now. And you think, if the bad guys had just done the same thing, instead of trying to line their own pockets, if they'd just simply been honest, we could have been still working together, and everybody would have been happy. But that's life.
It sounds like good karma, or kind of everything aligned the wrong way, and then you guys handle it the right way, and then it's now come good appropriately for everybody. Yes,
except the bad guys who are I don't know what they're doing now. In fact, one of them, the worst of the three of them, has disappeared off the face of the earth. But anyway, so that was one of those situations where out of what. And there were some dark days in that, and that's one of the things I would say to in thinking about career and what lessons you'd learn, because you use that word. I suppose that's an example to me of you got to be true to what you're about, and if you believe in something and it's right, just you got to pursue it. So you've got to just take that. I mean, I came in that particular situation. I was still on the board with these guys as the case was rumbling along. I mean, I got serious personal abuse, verbal and otherwise, and but you just gotta focus on what's the end game, what is the goal here, and the goal is to protect the investment and to try and to try and right or wrong, you might say.
So kind of doing the right thing, and very simple.
Absolutely, do the right thing, and even though it's I mean there were times when I just wished Dermot would just give it up, but he was right. He was absolutely right, and the fact that we won in the end, which is an amazing achievement, because when you're litigating for fraud, that's a very high bar, and I guess the other thing about that was the teamwork and the collegiality of the legal guys and myself and other witnesses was just amazing. Intense, but amazing, but terrific. But as you say, the simple thing is do what's right, and then stay true to that, and you won't go too far wrong.
Interesting. If you had your time again and your 24-year-old self, what career advice would you give yourself, looking back? So let's say, with a kind of your head on now.
I think ultimately, and I kind of lived this myself out of necessity, but looking back, it was the right thing to do. You can't beat work ethic, James. I mean, like it's, and that's not to say you don't want to be a busy fool, okay? But you got to, you got to put the effort in if you want to do anything well, and that's not just work. It's playing football. It's whatever you do. You got to put the effort in, and it came naturally to me, but that was because of circumstances. But I do see amongst younger colleagues and then younger people maybe who I'd interface with, at times you don't see that as much now. There's a kind of is entitlement the right word? There's a sense of or maybe they've got the balance better than I have. I don't know, but certainly I think a kind of a strong work ethic is very important to progress and do anything well.
Give me examples how that might present now compared to the past. So just being on time for a meeting, or returning a phone call, or just respect.
Yeah, and
quality work. There's no errors in it, and kind of.
And absolutely, and taking that extra bit of time to do something, thoroughly. I mean, like if I'm doing a job work still for the boss, I'd be looking at as many sources of information as I can, and a lot of it will be no use actually. I've seen enough work, whether it's academic or otherwise, of the generation coming through, let's say, and there's just a sense that desire to do the best possible job in any situation is not perhaps as prevalent. I'd say that perhaps is a generalization, but I do think that there's no substitute for a kind of an earnest and thorough attempt at doing whatever it is you're doing. And I'm not saying that that's the way to progress in a career course, an element of it, but it's just taking pride in what you're doing and doing the best possible job in whatever situation, whether it's being a barista in a coffee shop or doing a report for a board of directors. It doesn't really matter. I think there's no substitute for that sort of thoroughness and desire to do the best possible job.
Yeah, it was interesting. Going back to our my question about KPMG and your experience in audit, I remember an experience myself where I left the minute book, the board minute book, in a photocopier in a particular client. I think you were on that particular job.
Oh dear.
And realised when I got back to the room and had to run all the way down the corridor, realising, and to be met by the chief executive with a big smile on his face saying, "I think you forgot something." And I didn't know what to say, and I have to say I wasn't feeling great at the time. And he said, and he handed me back the board minute book. He said, "I don't think you'll ever do this again." He says, "No, I won't." So lesson learned.
Exactly.
It's the fun. Maybe we had more flexibility in the sense of how the world presented, but also maybe to get places you had to work hard to get there. You couldn't you weren't enabled technologically to actually send a text or be there or send an email to say I don't have the stuff. You just had to get it done.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. In a sense,
expectations are higher now too as a result of that too, which presents its own challenges. I mean, there was a time, when back in my NCB days, we'd be working on, let's say, circulars to be sent to shareholders, right? Now there was no email, there was no electronic way you could transmit these documents. So literally, a hard copy would be sent, let's say, from the solicitors, and you proofed it, and you literally used a pen and marked up changes and underlined stuff, and either faxed it back or sent it back again in hard copy. And that, within that, there was an inbuilt acceptance that it will take some time before the solicitor gets the document back. Okay, but now with electronic communications, it's all well. I sent it to you 2 hours ago. Why have you not sent it back? And that's unrealistic, because again, it gets back to the whole idea of doing the best possible job. You've got to give people the time to distill information and think about it. And one of the things that I criticised myself about over the past 2 decades in IIU is sometimes because we've been so busy, one hasn't been able to give the requisite amount of time to think about stuff. And I think that's one thing it's important to do in a workplace. Try and make sure you give yourself the time to think about the important stuff in your work, because if you don't, it's not going to be the best possible job you can do, and we're all guilty of that, unfortunately.
Is that learning to say no in a nice way, or sleeping on something overnight that doesn't really have to go out? You can see how it's been phrased. Let's look in the morning.
Well, that's something I very much live by. I mean, just a recent example. I was doing an important note for the boss for yesterday. He wanted to talk about something yesterday, and I had it drafted on Tuesday evening, and I was very happy with it, but I didn't send it, even though he was expecting it. because I thought, just to your point, I'm an early morning person, so I wanted to get up the next morning. Got up at 6:15 yesterday, gave it just half an hour, reread it, found a few things, one actually error, and also a couple of things that phrased differently made certain points a bit more powerful, and did that, sent it off around 7 a.m. yesterday morning, spoke to him about it, and he was delighted with it. So that's a very good point. Saying no is another very good point. I mean, but that can be difficult in the workplace, particularly if you've got demanding boss. I'm not saying about mine, but just in general, that can be difficult. But you just got to learn how to manage the time. One of the key things I think, and where one or two of my colleagues would fall down, if I may comment on them, is that prioritization is very important as well. You've got to be able to judge what other things you need to get done. It sounds obvious, but actually sometimes it's not when there's so much stuff coming at you. It's not that obvious, and it's not that easy to do. But you've got to decide, well, that thing, I really need to get that done today. That, something that probably can wait. I can probably, but you can be courteous to people and say, listen, I know you want me to do that, but just, I'll have that to you by Monday, or whatever it is, And you also you can't be shy about asking people to their face, when do you really need that for? And that's one thing that I learned many moons ago. Even with the boss, I'd say, listen, he'll ask me to do something. I say, well, when do you actually need that for? And sometimes you say, well, actually, I needed it yesterday, so can you get doing it now? Or I say, well, I'm meeting James next Wednesday, so if you get it for bring money, that's fine. So, and that's important. You've got to prioritise. Sadly, I have one or two colleagues who, when I work with them together on, say, a legal document or whatever, they've got all these points, and like 2/3 of them are just non-points, and yet we spend time talking about them. In inability to prioritise, waste time. So that's, I suppose, getting back to doing the good job well, and crafting or generating the time to do a job as best as you can is making sure you manage your time as effectively as you can, which isn't always easy with phone calls coming in and colleagues coming into your office, but you've got to try and do that, because that'll help. So
the ability maybe to, it's getting too hot at the moment, there's too much on, let me just take 10 minutes just to breathe,
around the block.
to breathe, to come down and say, okay, well, now I see it a bit clear, and then to clarify, and then communicate to people to say, is this important? No, right, can we push it out a week or whatever? So that clear communication, but confidence as well.
Yeah,
and people appreciate that. Probably you're managing their expectation as well.
Yeah, most people would and should.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's courtesy apart from anything else, and as long as everybody knows what the writing instructions are, the key thing then is not to disappoint. If you said, listen, can we push it out to Monday, you got to deliver on Monday then. So.
Okay, there's no excuse to actually use it against the deadline. No, I get. If you didn't do what you did, would you be? I know you're a big football fan, soccer fan, not a rugby fan, as you call it, egg chasing in the day, which I think is a lovely word. Some people may be offended by it. I think it's a wonderfully complimentary word. Like, would you be a mixologist? Would you be a photographer? Professional golfer? Is there anything you could say, wow, I'd love to have done that? I went to a Christian Brothers school in Belfast, and I blame them. I could have played for my beloved Chelsea if they'd only let me not have to play GA. Well, as evidenced by what I said earlier, I think pharmacy was a career that I loved. Science. I did chemistry for my A levels. That was a really I really loved it, and I was very, very tempted to do that. So listen, fancifully, there's lots of things that I'd love to have done, but I wouldn't have the proficiency to do them. But pharmacy, I probably would have. Yeah, but again, it would have been. Who knows how the career would have gone? It certainly, my career hasn't gone anything like the way I thought it would have gone, and that's terrific. That's wonderful. That's a rich experience. It's been a very unpredictable path for me, but that's fine. Pharmacy. The idea was, as I said earlier, be my own boss. So the idea was do pharmacy, and then maybe have a chain of pharmacy shop. Actually, who knows? I might have ended up as a research chemist. Well, when you retire from this job, could you go back and retrain? Do you think? Would you?
No, I don't think so. I think when I hang up the boots for this one, I would like, frankly, a lot less responsibility and a lot more time for doing other stuff. And that's not me being lazy. That's just this isn't a rehearsal. This is the only life you got. And
Okay. When you recruit people, say over the years, what qualities are you looking for? And has it changed as we go into the newer technological age that we're in now? Say go back 20 years ago versus now, or is the same ingredient? You're looking for the same ingredients?
Probably both. Actually, I think, and this is, I would imagine, partly due to my own, let's say, maturity and experience over the time as well. Back, recruiting, say 15, 20 years ago, you would have been very focused on the CV, the academic achievement, that type of thing. Real traditional stuff, I would always have, because of my own background, maybe I always would have had a draw for people with a bit of spark and a bit of personality. That aspect of it has probably been enhanced over the years. When I interview somebody now, you take the CV for granted up to a point, but you want personality. You want people who are engaging. You want people who are demonstrably flexible, adaptable. Because at the end of the day, I would say to you that other than certain technical skills, I'd almost prefer to have somebody, certainly at a more junior level, I prefer to have somebody working with me who has excelled in their undergraduate and maybe postgraduate career in something, as opposed to necessarily getting a lesser grade in what you might term a vocational career degree or whatever, because I think that ability to excel can very much be harnessed in a workplace. In our work, you do need people with certain proficiencies in the financial side of things, but I think that you could actually, in fact, a man you and I know well, our old partner in KPMG, who was a physicist himself, that blending non-business or non-relevant undergraduate with maybe some postgraduate business is a nice combination, because you get a different perspective.
And they have a different mindset, different training to bring to it. So, I mean, so someone has a 1 first-class honours or 2-1 or 2-2, you see people, which I have a small difficulty with. I do understand the concept of the academics, but the person may not have matured, or that person could be a brilliant person.
Absolutely.
And they're maybe 4 or 5 marks off that 2-1 and they're 2-2, and they're just really good at what they do. I mean, if you can think of really strong people you've worked with, out of curiosity, I'm curious, were they kind of very academic, or were they kind of in the kind of mid to upper academics?
There'll be a huge range, James, but I mean, again, it comes down to personality and that spark. I mean, sure, my boss never went to college.
So okay,
when talk academics, I mean, brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but never went to college. And he could. I learn every day, still, from him, because it's just it's nous, it's instinct, it's intuition, whatever it is, and he got oodles of personality, charisma, etc. So that's very important.
And can you learn that, or is it part of you?
It's primarily innate,
It's your genes, is it?
I think so. Yeah. And anybody who I've worked with or been in the company of who have that charisma, that X factor, call it what you like, I think it's innate. I don't think you can really work on that.
Okay.
Would you think so?
I think this is the nature nurture thing. I think you're born a particular way, that you're open or closed. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but not pejorative, because some people might perceive to be closed, but they're brilliant at going through and learning, getting their academics, getting top degrees, but their people skills or their ability to read what's in front of them. I think to me, if you can read what's in front of you on a human level, that is 3/4 of the battle.
No, yeah, that's fair. Yeah,
you have that cell, and where you get that maybe from your sport or from your upbringing or family, or just you've had it. It's part of you, maybe it's in your genes. Because you can say, I'm not sure about this. All my senses are saying, no, there's something a bit off here.
Yeah.
And you just hold back. And you voice that at the start. So as you're going through it, you say, yeah, okay, I was right about this. Because I think, where I see it, I think certain people will give off vibes.
Yeah.
And if you've been around a while, you get to say, oh, that's the same vibe as that person.
Yeah.
And my experience with that person was this, ergo. And it tends to be the same. It's funny, I was interviewing someone last night abroad, and they came across to me what I call a red person, very impatient, kind of passive aggressive nearly, and this is via Zoom. And as we were going through it, they turned over 2 jobs over the last 6 months, and weren't prepared to explain it. But I had a vibe going into it. I said, I'm just not comfortable even through a computer.
Yes.
Now they're very, very strong professionally. I'm not judging them, but it was just that intensity was there that I'm for a particular environment would not be right. For some other environments, it may be spot on.
Yeah. Well, that's fair too. And I guess, well, and I have interviewed people not just for our own organisation, because I sit in boards, and it's typically finance people. I'd be asked to, once the executives have maybe narrowed down a new, let's say, financial controller to a shortlist, I would be asked to interview them. So it's not just the very narrow sphere of my own workplace. But the point you make is fair. But you can tell, and I think that's what I was saying about maturity in my own experience. You do, it's almost, I wouldn't say discard the CV, but it's about the personality. It's about, does this person culturally fit with the organisation they're going to be in? And I work with software companies where it's buzz and geeks and one type of culture. I work with very staid businesses as well, and so there's that cultural aspect as well. But no matter what way you do it, it comes down to people's personality and whether they'll fit. And that to me, over the time, has become more important than just the academic thing.
Okay, 22-year-old graduate, as they commence their career, what advice would you give them? What are the kind of three here's how you should embrace or approach?
Well, the standard
work ethic, I presume, would be one to demonstrate your.
The big thing for me probably is, and this is founded in my own experience and the way opportunities can open up in adversity. I think actually Einstein said that in adversity there's opportunity. One of the low points of my entire career life was when I didn't pass the final accountancy exams back in 1988. I'd never failed an exam in my life. I just didn't. It just wasn't in my canon. Failing an exam, that is just not me, right? I did. And devastating it was, but you knuckle down. And so I set about repeating, which I did. Now, if I had passed the first time, there was a possibility I may have travelled abroad with KPMG. Whereas because I had to repeat, I had to stay in Dublin. In staying in Dublin, I got the call from NCB that would I join them once the exams were over. And that has been the most amazing, that phone call has now led to what has become my career. And, I suppose the advice would be, there will be knocks, but just dust yourself down, make something of it. It'll be either proactive that you have to do something yourself, or in that case, the example I gave, it was a reactive thing. I got lucky, but we all need a bit of luck in life, But looking back on it, it was an amazing set of circumstances. It still doesn't get over the pain and the hurt of failing an exam for the first and only time in my life. But nonetheless, all of a sudden this amazing opportunity arose, and there was ashes, and here we are. So, don't be disheartened with bumps in the road. Assess them for what they are, and just try and do better the next time. I mean that's because there will be bumps. Life isn't smooth.
Workplace stress, mindfulness. What's your views on? Well,
I think we all got to do all got to take care of ourselves. But I mean, we all do it in different ways. I suppose you need a release, don't you? Somehow. I'm speaking from a slight position of weakness in that we don't have any particular. We're a very small organisation, quite old school, so we don't have any formal.
So there's no pool tables or table tennis tables?
No, there's no firemen's poles or free beer on a Friday. There's none of that sort of stuff. No. But I do think mindfulness and mental and physical health are very important, and we've certainly got super policies in place for people. But that's almost after the fact. You should be trying to prevent that. But I see another organisation I work with that there's a plethora of things available, and it's very important to let that steam off and to have an infrastructure perhaps where you can do that. It's just not our organisation.
Would you look at? Sorry to interrupt. It just came to me. I know in France, like at 7:00, emails get pushed back to the sender because someone's not working.
Yeah,
and that's kind of a law. Do you ever see us going there? Going back to your other thing about mission critical stuff. Very rarely it has to be done after 7:00 in the evening.
I think that has to depend on the organisation. I mean, in the sort of work we do, like we have investments east and west, So somebody's always up. And I'm not saying that means that John Bateson or any of my colleagues have to be looking at the computer screen 24/7 and checking emails, but nonetheless, sadly in the work we do, crises can arise, and so I think that will depend on the organisation. It's a laudable objective. I think there are also some organisations who prohibit staff who are away on vacation from accessing their email. So again, I think that just depends on the organisation. Okay. If it's a big organisation, you've got deputies and you've got alternates.
The support to make it happen.
It's just the way we work. The vast majority of our projects are individual, one-on-one with Dermot. So it doesn't really work.
Well, my last question: post COVID-19, what changes and opportunities do you see in the workplace? Which we're not out of it yet, of course, but I'm just curious to share any thoughts.
Well, clearly, I mean, from my experience working with, let's say, a dozen companies throughout the crisis, the whole remote working thing has generally worked. I do think as time has worn on, I think the idea that there will be institutionalized remote working across the board isn't going to happen. Already in certain companies that would lend themselves to permanent remote working, I'm thinking again of the software companies and that we would have in our portfolio. Cracks are beginning to show already. People, a proportion of the workforce are feeling a bit isolated and a bit low for that. Productivity is dropping, no question. There are certain organisations that face-to-face collaboration is better face-to-face than via a screen.
They're creative people and they're isolated and they can't be creative.
Absolutely. You're bouncing ideas off one another. So I think that the opportunity is that we can hopefully get a better balance between in a building and at home. But I think the whole idea of there'll be no need for office blocks in the Dublin city centre or wherever else is grossly overblown. I think the idea that people can come and go is probably a little bit tricky as well, because again, to the point of collaboration, physical collaboration, you have to coordinate when people are going to be in. So I think the opportunity is to get a better balance. I suppose in our business, there's a specific opportunity, which is there are businesses that are good businesses which have been hit badly by this, and that gives us an investment opportunity, I suppose, which says let's not deny that. If you've investment monies, then it's that there's lots of opportunity out there. So
because valuations will have dropped, and that creates
yeah, exactly.
So the risk tolerance becomes more acceptable in the sense because
and you might have fatigue of the existing shareholders who maybe bankrolled something for a while, and all of a sudden the lid is in a line of knock, so they're not interested anymore. So there's that opportunity. I suppose, again, the organisation culture is something else that probably has changed. I think the whole sense of people, doing the right thing and helping each other. I've seen that even in our own organisation. The people's consideration one for the other has probably increased. So is there a societal opportunity to be nicer? How does that manifest itself in the workplace? It's got to be a good thing, right? It's got to be.
John, thank you very much for your time this morning. Problem. It was very appreciative sharing some of your experiences and thoughts, and hopefully whoever listens to this will take something out of it. Thank you for listening to the Career Scoop, brought to you by Elevate Career Advice and Elevate Executive Selection. I'm James Fitzsimons, and I hope you've enjoyed listening. Next week we will be talking to Sean Coughlin about his career highs and lows. Hope to see you there.